This is part 3 of the video presentation on Han Feizi. And again, he says in chapter 6, found on page 319 of our text, thus an enlightened ruler uses law to select men and does not try to promote them himself. He uses the law to evaluate accomplishments and does not try to measure them himself. When ability cannot be hidden and errors cannot be covered up, when those who only have a good reputation cannot advance, and denunciations cannot make good men retire, then the relationship between ruler and minister will be clearly defined, and the state will be easy to govern. Thus, if your majesty would only attend to the law, everything else would be fine. The apparatus of state then becomes self-propagating, and its operation is geared, thinks Han Feizi, to the expectation that most rulers are going to be neither especially good nor bad, but mediocre. And these are the operations of bureaucracy as found in Han Feizi on page 358 of the RCCP text. Now, those above encourage the people to plow their fields and cultivate new land because they want to increase the people's means of livelihood. But the people think their superiors are just being cruel. They draw up penal codes and establish heavy penalties in order to put an end to wickedness. But the people think their superiors are just being harsh. They levy taxes in money and grain in order to fill the coffers and granaries of the state so that they can fund military expeditions and rescue the people in times of famine. But the people think their superiors are just being greedy. They ensure that everyone in the state knows how to put on armor and see to it that there are no private exemptions from military service, because they know that in order to capture enemies in battle, the people must be able to combine their strength and fight fiercely. But the people think their superiors are just being violent. These four things are the means to good order and security, but the people do not know enough to be pleased by any of them. The reason why rulers seek out officers with sage-like understanding is because they know that the wisdom of the people is not sufficient to guide them. In the past, you opened up a channel. Besides Lord Shang and Shen Buhai, the RCCP description of legalism identifies another main contributor, Shen Dao. Here is the RCCP description of him. Shunzi, also known as Shen Dao, an important figure within the Feizi legalist school. Shunzi developed the doctrine of the power of position, an idea that directly influenced Han Feizi's thought. According to the doctrine of Shi, that is the power of position, the key to a ruler's success lies in his ability to maintain his socio-political authority, his socio-political superiority over his subjects, so that he can use the power and prestige of his position to intimidate people into obeying his commands. The idea can be understood as an amoralized, institutional version of the earlier notion of government through moral charisma advocated by the Confucians. But whereas the Confucians maintained that the power of moral charisma is generated through the cultivation of the ruler's character, Shen Dao and Han Feizi believed that the power of status is simply a concomitant feature of the ruler's socio-political position. Han Feizi addresses the philosophy of Shunzi in chapter 8, which is entitled A Critique of the Doctrine of the Power of Position. It should be noted parenthetically that Han Feizi has invented a particular literary expression that is used in this chapter. He presents positions that he imagines or has collected of critics of Shunza's philosophy, and then he gives a response to those criticisms. Shunza's idea of Shi, the power of position, adds the element of political realism to Han Feizi's philosophy, in addition to the legalism that we find in the different ways in Lord Shang and Shen Buhai's thought. In this aspect, Han Feizi's philosophy does have aspects of Machiavelli's realism that we mentioned before. The concern is in teaching rulers how to maintain and use the power of their office. Again, this should be a line of thought that is geared to the mediocre ruler. Han Feizi says in chapter 8, the Shunzi chapter, as found on pages 330 and 331 of our RCCP text. Furthermore, if a Yao, Shun, Jie, or a Zhou only emerged once every 1,000 generations, it would still seem like they were born bumping shoulders and treading on each other's heels. But those who actually govern each age are typically somewhere in the middle between these two extremes. The reason why I discuss the power of position is for the sake of these mediocre rulers. These mediocre rulers, at best, they do not reach the level of a Yao or a Shun. And at worst, they do not behave like a Jia or a Zhou. If they hold to the law and depend on the power of position, there will be order. But if they abandon the power of their position and turn their backs on the law, there will be disorder. Now, if one abandons the power of position, turns one's back on the law, and waits for a Yao or Shun, then when Yao or Shun arrives, there will indeed be order, but it will only be for one generation of order in 1,000 generations of disorder. On the other hand, if one holds to the law, relies on the power of position, and waits for a Jia or a Zhou, then when a Jia or a Zhou comes, there will indeed be disorder, but it will only be one generation of disorder in 1,000 generations of order. Having 1,000 generations of order with one generation of disorder, and having one generation of order and 1,000 generations of disorder, is like getting on two fast horses and riding them in opposite directions. The distance between the two will certainly be great. Together with law and administrative regulation, the use of the power position ensures that the state will be able to perpetuate itself. We should pause here and point out that this has in fact been empirically borne out. Machiavelli talks about the republics he knows of that have the greatest longevity: Sparta, Venice, Rome. The continuity of the Chinese state under these principles lasted more than twice as long as any of those states that Machiavelli mentions. The later Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantium Empire, approaches the Chinese longevity, and does so on similar principles. I suspect that these are still living ideas in the Chinese political consciousness. In any case, Han Feizi teaches in chapter 5, entitled The Way of the ruler must have a kind of isolated life, because everybody is frankly his enemy. That is, they would benefit by seeing the ruler killed. This is going to include the members of the royal family, the ministers, and outside foreign powers. The ruler who wants to survive must be on constant guard against these elements, and that is the infusion of a genuine position of realism in Han Feizi's thought.